Hi everyone, it's Dr. Miller, and today I would like to talk to you about developing a literary argument. I almost want you to think about it as if you were a literary detective and you use the textual evidence in a piece of work as clues to help you draw a conclusion. Now, typically what we do in writing is we look at a piece of work, we develop a claim, and then we go in search of clues to support that claim. Today, I want to offer you a different solution. So we're going to talk about textual evidence, or TE, plus LC, or literary claims, equals literary arguments. If you click on this link here, you will see the 2021 prompt, I believe it's question 1, where you will be able to access the reading that I'm going to use for this discussion today. Before the end of the video, or maybe even at the end of the class period in which we implement this, I want you to be able to extract relevant textual evidence from a literary work and draw a logical conclusion from a specific writing prompt. So here is the prompt, and a lot of the slides look similar. You can see I'm going to go through them, but I do want you to know they are different. So for example, if you look here, the following, at the very bottom of the screen, it says the following excerpt is from Tim Winton's novel Breath, published in 2008. And in this passage, the main character, Bruce Pike, recalls an incident at a nearby river. Read the passage carefully, then in a well-written essay, analyze how Winston uses literary elements and techniques to represent the complex response of the narrator to the incident at the riverbank. Notice that they always say complex response because it's oftentimes, maybe it's conflicted. So I want to discuss with you multiple ways in which you can organize data or textual evidence to draw a conclusion. The first one, you'll see a number there, it says just one piece of evidence leads to a logical conclusion. You should probably hit pause and go in and read this short excerpt from the link that I provided in the previous slide. I'll go back. And if you can click on that link at the bottom, you will have access to the reading prompt, and you will know exactly what I'm referencing here. I'm going to assume that you did, so head ahead and hit pause, do that, and come back. So number 1 says just one evidence leads to a logical conclusion. Now this piece of evidence I think I found, I don't remember which line, but it was towards the end, and it looks pretty explicitly stated. It wasn't necessarily a dialogue, it was more like a stream of conscious, but the narrator states, "I felt sympathy and contempt all at once." So that's a piece of evidence. If I were a detective and I found that, I would have to draw some sort of conclusion. So instead of me forming the conclusion first, I'm going to use the evidence. I'm going to work a little bit backwards to determine my conclusion. So my conclusion that I'm going to use from this piece of evidence, and obviously understanding the context of the story, would be through the young boy's stream of consciousness, the narrator, conflicted by the range of his emotions in the moment, struggles to make sense of the woman's inability to take a joke. A couple of things that are happening here. One is struggles, you'll see, is written in the present tense. So one thing that you should know about AP literature or writing about anything in regards to literature is you always want to write in the present tense. So the narrator struggles to make sense of the woman's inability to take a joke. And so you can see that when it says analyze the literary elements or techniques, I'm referring to the stream of conscious that's occurring in this work. Okay, so here is how you can take one piece of evidence, and one piece of evidence is strong enough to lead to this logical conclusion. I'm going to turn the slide to the next one. This one is entitled A String of Evidence. And I have to tell you, this is probably one of my favorites, so much so that I would hope when you are writing an essay that you would sort of embed this in your work, where you might take one piece of evidence and you try several different ways to organize your evidence to draw your conclusions. So this one's entitled A String of Evidence. It's a cumulative list, and it's really, in this case, it happens to be the narrator's thoughts versus his actions. And basically, when you have so much evidence, it's a collection of overwhelming evidence in the text. So you find several examples and you list them all. They may be in different places. I believe the evidence here that I found was throughout the reading. So one piece of evidence, I said, well, gosh, there's a distinction or a conflict between what this narrator thinks and what his actions are. So I separated them. And obviously you would embed this into a question with your quotes, but this would be great for textual evidence, asking questions, no reason to doubt, sluggish water, harmless, should have understood. Versus his action, the things, those were what he was thinking, but what he does is he took action, he bolted out, he wades in, he keeps diving and groping. So my conclusion after I take accumulation of all of this piece of evidence, right? So I'm a detective, I'm a literary detective, I'm finding all of these clues throughout the reading that helps me to form this conclusion. So it's a collection of overwhelming evidence. And so my conclusion now is, although the narrator knew there was no imminent danger, he eventually succumbs to the girls, and there's several girls in here, emotional pleas superseding his voice of reason. Again, this is a string of evidence. It's different from just one piece of evidence. This is several pieces of evidence. So when you read a short story and you see something in line 7 and then in line 12, you can take those phrases, put them together, and list them in a couple of sentences, and then draw your conclusion. Let's take a look at the domino effect. I like this one. This one's fairly simple. It says number 3 is the first conclusion becomes the evidence for the next set. So for example, if my piece of evidence, and I don't recall which line I got this in, but the evidence says he lay in the water trying to decide what to think of her. Now remember, I have the prompt at the bottom of each slide so that you can always refer to it. And so my first conclusion is, through his stream of consciousness, the narrator expresses a sense of disbelief in the prideful woman's mental and physical deterioration over a playful prank. That's the conclusion that I'm drawing. Now, if you can see where it says evidence, I've taken that same piece of conclusion and it now serves as my evidence so that I can form another conclusion from that. And this time, this piece of evidence leads me to believe that the narrator's frustration with his inability to satisfy this woman's through his action directly influences his own sense of self. Now, you might get a different conclusion from reading that, but that's what I gather as a result of this piece of evidence, this one piece of evidence. And this process, or this domino effect, can be continuous. You don't have to stop there. You can keep going until you reach a conclusion that you feel very strongly about and you feel is insightful in your work. The next one is coupling evidence. And you've probably heard the term, they go together, right? So in this case, the evidence, you need this one to go with this one in order for it to work. So for example, he independently perfected the art of causing riverside panic, right? And then the other one that I think goes together is, there was no time to go get help. He was it. He felt himself rise in the moment, embark upon his mission, pull his shirt off. So all of those things, those two separate pieces of examples, they go together. I'm going to put them together and form a new conclusion. Now, if I were to take one and not use the other, I wouldn't be able to form the same conclusion. So one is contingent upon the other. So this is the coupling of evidence. So my new conclusion is, Bruce Pike, the narrator and main character, playfully perpetuates the woman's false narrative of a boy drowning by assuming his role as a superhero to save the day. So again, one piece of evidence is contingent on the other for it to work. Divergent reasoning is really just, and I don't have all of the examples here, but really it's a complex reasoning combining the other patterns. So I gave you 4. It's combining, you can take the one-on-one, you can take a string of evidence, you can take the domino effect, or you can take the coupling of evidence, and this can form a divergent reasoning. And what that means is, if you think about the prompt, they're asking for something specific. As long as you come up with opposing viewpoints, and you have collected data, let's say you collect data that supports one theory or one logic, and you get another data set that creates a whole new sense of piece of evidence. This is what makes it so complex, because it is opposing. So my first set of data, I'm sure I can collect 3 to 4 pieces of data from this reading that would help me to develop a conclusion that says the narrator maliciously and deliberately perpetrates this prank. But then I could also, on the contrary, find as much information, if not more, on this opposing literary viewpoint where the narrator is just simply thrusted into this incident at the riverbank and his response is typical to that of his age. So these are divergent reasoning where you show two literary opposing viewpoints in terms of the response. You find data to warrant that, and you could write that in your response, which helps you to understand why it is such a complex response for the narrator. Comparative reasoning is literally taking these two ideas expressed here in divergent reasoning and now placing them in a Venn diagram and communicating the similarities and the differences, which would also explain the complex response of the narrator to the incident at the riverbank. All right. Hopefully that's helpful, and we will practice in class the different ways to do that.